Scott Shellnut back with CFI Pro, wrapping up the private pilot regulations. And today we're going to be talking about the last couple of regulations dealing with private pilot. And the first one is 61.110, the night flying exceptions. So here's the situation. You're at your flight school, have a student comes in, and the student is what was signed up to do his instrument training. So as a good CFI, you say, sure, before we begin, I'd like to be able to check all your credentials and make sure that you're properly prepared to go out here and do the flight training. So I'd like to see your government-issued photo ID, please, just to make sure that everything's good with that. And I'd like to be able to see your medical to see if everything's good with that. And I'd also like to see your pilot certificate. And when you look at the back of their pilot certificate, you know on the back where it says English proficient, you look there and you see something that says night flying prohibited. And this sparks something in your mind. You're like, I think I learned about that. I'm not sure where I heard that from. So you pick up your digital FARs and you search for night flying prohibited, and you come up to 61.110, and there's another one for commercial. And you read over it, and it says here in 61.110, subject to the limitations in paragraph B, and that's going to be what we're going to be talking about, a person is not required to comply with the night flight training requirements of this subpart if the person receives flight training and resides in the state of Alaska. Now, this is only for one group of people, those who receive flight training in and reside in the state of Alaska. So no other part of the United States deals with this except for the people who receive flight training in and reside in the state of Alaska. So you turn his pilot certificate over, and sure enough, there's an Alaska address on there, and you ask him, what's the deal? Where did you just move here? You go, yep, I just moved here. I was in the military. I was up in Alaska. I got my private pilot up there. So all this story starts to come together. And then you think to yourself, well, what is? Let me read down through here and make sure that everything is still good to go. So you read on, because it says subject to the limitations in paragraph B. So you keep on reading, and it says here, a person who receives flight training and resides in the state of Alaska, but does not meet the night flight training requirements of this section because it's daytime there for a large period of the year, may be issued a pilot certificate with a limitation night flying prohibited, which means that they have a private pilot certificate, but they can't fly at night because they haven't done the night training, and must comply with the appropriate night flight training requirements of the subpart within 12 calendar month period after the issuance. And you look at the date his private pilot certificate was issued, and it was issued 18 months ago. So as a person who is doing a flight training checkout or a flight rental checkout, as well as going to go on and do something with this pilot to advance their training, this person's not even legal now because he doesn't even have a legal pilot certificate because it really became void 6 months ago because it voids at 12 months and it's been 18 months. So at the end of that period, that certificate will become invalid for use until the person complies with the appropriate night training requirements of this subpart. And what you would do after that is you would go out and do the night flight training requirements with your student, and then you would make an appointment with an examiner. That could be either a DPE or an FAA aviation safety inspector, and present to them a logbook or training record endorsement from an authorized instructor that verifies accomplishment of the appropriate night flight training requirements of this subpart. Now, here's the rub. Here's one of those things in the regulations in which if you go to your advisory circular and you start looking at how to write a regulation, this is not in there. This endorsement is not in there. And if you go and read the very first paragraph of the appendix in the advisory circular, 6165, it states that this is just a montage of some very common ones, and it's not necessarily holistically all endorsements. And you would actually need to present some type of endorsement saying that this person's ready. So how do you do that? Well, you'll have to go into specifically like how to make up an endorsement when there's no endorsement there. And you basically just put what you did and what it's for and how you complied with it. And then you sign it and date it. It's very, very simple. And this is called an administrative check ride or administrative exam or an administrative activity. And usually examiners probably won't charge for this. It'll probably, if they do, they charge like maybe 25 or $100. And you would just have the night training logged, and then you would have the made up endorsement. There's no need to do a 6139 A6I because this is really not a practical test. It's an administrative action. And they will get a brand new paper certificate. There's no need to go flying. It's strictly 100% administrative. And of course, it says here in paragraph C, a person that does not meet the night flight or the night flying requirements in 61109 Delta 2 I2 or J2 may be issued a private pilot certificate with limitation night flying prohibited. This limitation may be removed by an examiner if the holder complies with the requirements of those parts. So if you are in Alaska, you could do the person's private pilot certificate without complying with the night flight training requirements. Okay, so that's 61110. Now here's one I think that is commonly broken, especially over in some of these big islands that we have in the part of the United States like Hawaii. And that is that pilots that are based on small islands. And it says here that except as provided in paragraph B of this section, an applicant located on an island from which the cross-country flight training required in 61109. Okay, so what is that? Do you remember what that was? Well, remember that we had to do the 61109 says you have to do the dual cross countries, the night cross countries. You have to have solo cross countries. And it says here that if the training in 61109 of this part cannot be accomplished without flying over water for more than 10 nautical miles from the nearest shoreline, need not comply with the requirements of that section. And what this means is need not comply means it's optional. Do most of the students actually go beyond 10 nautical miles? Yes. Do they need to? No. Need not comply means optional. However, it says here, if there are other airports that do permit civil operations and are available to which a flight may be made without flying over water for more than 10 nautical miles from the nearest shoreline, the applicant must show completion of 2 round-trip solo flights between those 2 airports that are farthest apart, including a landing at each airport on both flights. So you would have to do 2 round-trip solo flights between 2 airports and a landing at each airport, and you could log that in lieu of that cross-country, even though you may not have met the nautical mile requirement or such and such. Okay, so beyond 50 nautical miles is cross-country in regards to pilot certificates getting issued. So if you're not able to fly that 50 plus nautical miles, then or your long cross country without flying more than 10 nautical miles, then you need not comply. However, if that is the case, it says an applicant who complies with paragraph A or B of this section and meets all the requirements for the issuance of a private pilot certificate, except the cross-country training requirements of 61109 of this part, will be issued a pilot certificate with an endorsement containing the following limitation. So here it is again. You're at your flight school. Person comes in. The student wants to train. You look at their information. You turn over the back of their pilot certificate, and you see an endorsement on the back of their pilot certificate right underneath English proficient, and it states, passenger carrying prohibited on more, that's a lot of highlighting. Passenger carrying prohibited on flights more than 10 nautical miles from whatever the island name. And that would be permanently on there until you release it as a flight instructor. Now it says the limitation may be subsequently amended to include another island if the applicant complies with the requirements of paragraph B of this section for another island. So you can actually have multiple islands on there. Or you can go someplace and you can meet the requirement and then have that limitation removed. Again, this requires you to make an endorsement to go meet with an examiner, and it's not going to be a 6139 A6I double I endorsement. It's going to be, which is your Alpha 1, by the way, in your advisory circular. It's not going to be that, and you're actually going to have to write it yourself. And you tell what you're doing, what you did, how you complied with it, and then you sign it. Okay? So that is that one. Very rare. The Alaska one and the Small Island one, very rare, but you got to understand that you've got to understand how to do your job. And if you don't know how to do your job, then you're not going to be a good flight instructor, because you're just not going to know what you need to know in order to do that. Okay, so let's look at 61.113 here. We're almost finished. Private pilot privileges and limitations to act as pilot in command. Very important for that. And it says here, except as provided in paragraphs B through H, which we're going to look at. No person who holds a private pilot certificate may act as pilot in command of an aircraft that is, all right, so here is our first limitation. So as pilot in command. Very first limitation, you may not act as PIC of an aircraft that is carrying passengers or property for compensation or hire. So that's our very first limitation. Our second limitation is, nor may that person for compensation or hire act as pilot in command of an aircraft. So the first one is carrying passengers or property for compensation or hire, and you may not, nor may that person for compensation or hire act as pilot in command of an aircraft. Okay, so that is the first two limitations. Now we get into some actual privileges. So in paragraph B, it says a private pilot may for compensation or hire act as pilot in command of an aircraft in connection with any business or employment if that flight is only incidental to that business or employment. And people ask me about this. Okay, Todd, what does that mean, incidental to business or employment? So I work for a big flight school, and I live in Atlanta, and their home office is in Florida, and they call me up one day and they say, hey, we need you down here for a meeting immediately. We've got an emergency meeting, and we need you down here this afternoon by 4 o'clock. And I'm like, well, there's no way I can drive down there or get to the airport. And they're like, well, don't you own your own airplane? I'm like, yes, I do. And they're like, well, just fly down here and we'll just pay for your fuel. So am I being compensated? I am being compensated. I put my fuel in my own airplane, but they're going to pay me or reimburse me for the fuel that it takes for me to get to that meeting. And that is incidental to my business or employment. All right? So it means that I'm not making money off of it. I'm just being reimbursed or compensated for that action. And I got to make really sure that I don't carry anyone else that works with me or carry any property down there that they've said, hey, can you throw a couple of those computers that are broken in the back seat and bring them down here for us so our IT compartment can fix it? And I'm like, nope, I can't do that, especially if they said, bring it down here, we'll pay you an extra $100 to carry that down here. Nope, I can't be compensated for that. And don't always look at compensation as just money. Compensation could be flight time and experience. Compensation is really up to the aviation safety inspector who's investigating the case. You can even go really kind of just crazy nuts with this. Okay, so you own a chocolate company and I own a peanut butter company, and you tell me, hey, I really would appreciate, I would consider it a dear favor, Todd, if you flew my daughter down to her graduation down in Florida so she could attend there, because I'm kind of tied up, but I would consider it a big favor. I may even do more business with you this year if you would do me this big favor. Well, that's compensation. We'd have to prove it. FAA would have to prove it, but that's compensation. So having something that you didn't have before, but you have it now, or to reap something back after you put it in, that is compensation. A private pilot may not pay less than the pro rata share of the operating expenses of the flight. I think this one is a little bit standoff. I don't like this one. Why not? Why can't you be reimbursed for something? I mean, it's your plane. You got operating expenses for the plane. Why can't you do have something like this where somebody can reimburse you for that? I mean, I don't like this rule. I've never have liked it. I wish FAA would remove it. But who cares if you make a little bit off of it? I mean, it's your plane. if you're flying some friends down and they just pay for the fuel, why not? Why can't they pay something on the engine rebuild fund? You know, if you've really got this thing down to a science and you say, okay, it cost me $180 an hour to operate this airplane, what's all in that $180? Fuel, oil, maintenance, any time-sensitive parts. Well, my magnetos have to be inspected every 500 hours. What's that cost me? Well, it cost me, let's just make up a number, $300. Okay, we'll take 300 and divide it by 500, and that's what I need to get. That's what I need to collect every operating hour to plan for the magneto rebuild or magneto 500-hour inspection. So it's very, very important. I absolutely hate this rule right here. I don't like it at all. I wish the FAA would just remove it because it doesn't make any sense. Letter D here says a private pilot may act as pilot in command of a charitable nonprofit or community event. Flight is described in 91.46. So you can take a look on over at 91.46 and read through that if you plan on doing any of the charity stuff. One of the caveats here, make a note beside this regulation here, if you would please. 500 hours. 500 hours is what you would need in order to actually do that. So if you don't carry anything out of 91.146, memorize the number 500. So you may do that. You may act as pilot in command of a charitable nonprofit or community event as long as you have a total of more than 400 total flight hours. Letter E here. A private pilot may be reimbursed for aircraft operating expenses that are directly related to search and location operations, provided that the expenses of provided that it only is fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees, and the operation is sanctioned under the direction and control of either 1, a local, state, or federal agency, 2, an organization that conducts search and rescue operations, like Civil Air Patrol or something like that, or maybe some other organization that I'm not aware of that does search and rescue operations. So it has to be that. The next one is a private pilot who is an aircraft salesman and who has at least 200 hours of log flight time may demonstrate an aircraft in flight to a prospective buyer. So what you could do on this is you could go to work for Piper or Mooney or Cirrus Aircraft, but you got to have at least 200 hours to qualify to be an aircraft salesman to demonstrate that to a prospective buyer. A private pilot who meets the requirements of 6169, which is towing gliders, may act as PIC of an aircraft towing a glider or unpowered ultralight vehicle, but you got to meet all the demands of 6169. And one of the demands that you have to meet, make a note of this next to G here, you've got to have at least 100 hours of PIC time in the make, model, and applicable type of aircraft that you're using. Category, class, and type. I said make, model. I apologize. Cat class type. A private pilot who meets the requirements of 6169 has got to have 100 hours of PIC time in the cat class and type if applicable for that aircraft that you're going to tow. I don't know what you would be towing someone with a type. Get out there in your Citation 550 and tow gliders. I don't know. Yeah, you think about it. H here says a private pilot may act as pilot in command for the purpose of conducting a production flight test. So the rest of these H down through here, I don't know if you. I wouldn't really worry about that. There's a couple down here in which you don't really have to worry about. So H, if you're going to conduct flight testing on an aircraft, I'm not going to do that. Then H would apply to you. I'm just going to skip down through here because I don't know of anybody here that's listening to this video that's going to go out and do production testing on an aircraft. But if you do, you can come back and look at H, but I wouldn't commit it to memory. I says a private pilot may act as pilot in command of an aircraft without holding a medical certificate issued under Part 67 of this part, provided that the pilot holds a valid U.S. driver's license, meets the requirements of 6123 Charlie 3 in compliance with this section, and all the following conditions and limitations. Well, this is going back to the alternate way that you can fly an airplane without a medical, which is the basic med. Okay, so 6123 Charlie 3 talks about basic med, and this is all the things that you have to know if you're going to be operating as a private pilot and you're going to be doing all the basic med stuff. So make sure that you check that out if that applies to you. So make sure you check that out if that does apply to you. And that's just about it. We're not going to talk about private pilot balloon ratings, and we're not going to talk about SIC privileges. And when we come back on the next lesson, we're going to be talking about commercial pilots. That's it for today. I'm Todd Shellnutt with CFI Pro. Bye-bye.